The vibrant scene of video game ROM hacks is one that's thoroughly alive and well, being a more accessible pastime these days than it used to be. That's not to say just anyone can do it, of course. It'll take some considerable learning of code on your part to even get your foot in the door, not to mention countless hours and mental dedication to come up with a finished product. I'm always so impressed by people who are prepared and able to create new imaginings on pre-existing games, even more so when what they come up with is as good as, or sometimes actually better than, the official game they're based on. If this is your first time hearing the term ROM hack, essentially what they entail is that someone will take an existing game engine and manipulate it somewhat to create alternate versions of it. It's not dissimilar to modding, I suppose, although quite often you'll get revolutionary new outcomes rather than just tweaked graphics or physics. A ROM hack could change very little in a game. It might simply fix some bugs or translate a pre-existing title into another language. Occasionally, as is the case with the mightily impressive Pokémon Unbound, for instance, what the authors managed to build is so different from the source material that you might wonder if it's still technically the same game. Entire game worlds could be stripped back to their raw materials and rebuilt from the ground up to create completely different storylines. A rare few even go as far as to introduce new mechanics to what's already there. It should go without saying that the enthusiasm and determination needed to pull something like that off is remarkable, especially considering you'd never be allowed to earn money for any of these. It ain't your IP after all. So, as a passion project, managing to envision and carry to completion one of these full ROM hacks is almost unrivaled, especially when, as is the case of this brand new Pokémon Fire Red reimagining, it's all done by one person. You'd have to be bonkers. Pokemon Big Blue version takes us back to the Generation 3 versions of the Kanto region. A very healthy proportion of all Pokemon hacks use Gen 3 source code. It's nostalgic, looks and sounds great, and being GBA, it's still reasonably accessible. Few people, if anyone, are trying to do this sort of thing with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. You really would have to be mad. As a bit of background for this project, it's the brainchild of one Michael Meehan. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. And attempts to reimagine the Kanto region as an open-world game. For an adventure that was so very linear, this sounds to me like an absolute nightmare to figure out, but should it work, would be outrageous fun. The idea here is that you can choose where in Kanto you'll start your journey from, and the standard blockages due to HMs, trainer and gym leader levels, Pokemon inventories, storyline and so on would all be reconfigured so you wouldn't get softlocked anywhere. That in itself would be quite the undertaking, to make that feel balanced regardless of where you started from. But that's not all. Big Blue has a ton of other changes too. Rather than just Bulbasaur, Charmander or Squirtle, you now get a choice between a total of 42 different starters. Not only that, the Pokédex itself is way larger, with every single Pokémon from the first 3 generations in the game. And get this, their Mega Evolutions are there too. This is a game mechanic that didn't appear until way later than the Game Boy Advance games, so its implementation is kinda game-changing. You now don't have to trade anything. Almost all species can be found in the wild, and trade evolutions have been replaced by new usable evolution items like Link Cable, Peat Block, and so on. The overworld graphics look pretty awesome as well, being kinda closer to Gen 4 than Gen 3 in style. Towns and cities, routes and caves have all been revamped and look amazing. There is a lot more depth than we got in the originals, with loads of side quests introduced throughout the world. A lot of them involve battling someone or finding a particular Pokémon that someone wants to see, then showing it to them. But they're definitely worth doing, as the rewards for doing so can be incredibly valuable. You might be rewarded with strong hold items, rare candies, or even Master Balls, useful because of the unusually large number of legendaries you'll come across on your journey. XP share is enabled as default, meaning you can much more easily train the 400 plus monsters you'll need for a full dex. I don't think you can turn it off, however. I certainly haven't found a way to, which may not be to every player's style. I also noticed fairly quickly the encounter rate is super high, and there's no cooldown. You can sometimes come out of an encounter only to fight another wild Pokémon on the very next tile. Get those repels and escape ropes as soon as you can. There are lots of other little quality of life upgrades and retroactive feature implementations to discover. TMs are reusable now, as they later would be. HMs, the things like Fly and Surf that often help you get around, are no longer required, but they're still there for convenience given to you by gym leaders. For instance, you can surf across waters, but there's also this trainer who lets you fast travel across using his Abra. The Fairy type, along with its elemental strengths and weaknesses, has been introduced, something that didn't show up in mainline Pokémon games until Generation 6 with X and Y. You can run indoors now, a change that I cannot thank the modder for enough. You're also a lot more likely to find shiny Pokémon now as well, if you're bothered by such things. All this in Pokémon Big Blue is majorly impressive stuff to look at and experience, and it gives a real freshness to what is now a 20-plus-year-old game. However, what is most remarkable for me personally is that the alteration of the whole game into this open-world style feels so natural. Game progress, such as trainer levels, strength of wild Pokémon, what the Pokémon sell, and so on, are simply scaled based on how many badges you have. It might seem like a simple enough approach, but the balance must have been incredibly hard to get right. It's taken one person years to accomplish this, and it really shows. I only wish I had 100 free hours to properly sink into Pokémon Big Blue version, because while perhaps not orthodox, it's pretty phenomenal all the same.